Our opening reading is from Kay Redfield Jamison, who is a clinical psychologist and writer. She also is someone who suffers from bipolar disorder. Restlessness and discontent are vital things, she says, and intense experience and suffering instruct us in ways that less intense emotions can never do. This talk aims to honor the place that our emotions have in giving significance to our lives, and to emphasize how important it is that those emotions don't dictate our actions in a thoughtless way, bringing pain to ourselves and the ones we most care about. Reverend Connolly goes on to say, most of what I've learned about emotions, I suppose, has been through a life of experiencing them. I expect that that's true for the rest of us as well. We've experienced their richness, their variety, their capacity to create moods and memories, pleasures and pains. Our emotions provide a way to understand others and to misunderstand others, to express ourselves and misrepresent ourselves. With so much at stake, it's essential that we understand our emotions better than we do. Daniel Goleman's book called Emotional Intelligence is the best recommendation that I can make as a place to begin. It's 21 years old now, old enough to have time into maturity, I guess. Other books have followed, and the field of academic research has expanded. More experiments have been done. The truths he has explicated have been expanded upon, but you can't do better than starting your research with this book. What are emotions and why? All emotions are, in essence, impulses to act, the instant plans for handling life that evolution has instilled in us, he says. Before there were people, there were mammals, and before there were mammals, there were reptiles and amphibians. A long train of evolution runs backwards from us to more primitive life forms, such as these, and backwards further to yet more primitive forms. The part of the brain where emotions live came into being a long time before the part of the brain that is responsible for our thinking, our cognitive capacity. It took millions of years for the development of the neocortex, that part of the brain that allows us to think. The neocortex contains the centers that put together and comprehend what the senses perceive. It adds to a feeling what we think about it. The neocortex increased our likelihood of surviving as individuals and as a species. It provided the talent for strategizing, long-term planning, and other mental wiles. The limbic system, the most primitive part of the brain, is responsible for such basic feelings as pleasure and lust. When the neocortex evolved from the limbic system, so did the mother-child bond that is the basis of the family unit and the long-term commitment to child rearing that makes human development possible. I don't expect to provide a comprehensive education in the workings of the brain in 20 minutes, but a short description of some of the basics will help all of us with a basis for understanding the thesis and for using the teachings in a productive way. Dr. Goldman refers to the section of the brain called the amygdala as the seat of all passion. There are two amygdalas, one on each side of the brain, nestled toward the side of the head. If you don't have an amygdala, you're not capable of recognizing feelings, and you are not capable of having feelings about your feelings. We know this from observing people who have had their amygdala removed as a way to surgically address seizures. The amygdala stores emotional memories, and emotional memories are what gives significance to things. At the same time, passions can take over and run amok. The amygdala can take control over what we do, even as the thinking brain, the neocortex, is still coming to a decision. There is an interplay between the amygdala and the neocortex that allows for both experiencing emotions and managing them. This fact is at the heart of what emotional intelligence is. We're all familiar with the concept of IQ, the intelligence quotient, that is used to measure intellectual capacity based on the assessment of results from a number of tests. One of the central points of Daniel Goleman's book is that one of the points I want to emphasize today is that this kind of assessment is woefully insufficient for predicting success in life measured by the ability to work well with others, to achieve success in fields other than the academic, and even perhaps especially in achieving happiness. IQ is an important indicator of some kinds of abilities, but it is incomplete in and of itself, which really should come as no surprise. We are more than our intellects. Our abilities to form and maintain relationships is also an important factor in leading a successful life. If we cannot feel emotions, we won't be able to achieve happiness. If we are unable to manage our emotions likewise, we will not be able to lead a stable, well-integrated life. So it behooves us to put a little time into learning about emotional intelligence. Doing so allows us to make better choices and opens up a range of possibilities for a successful future for individuals and also for communities such as church communities. Here are some insights based on the research of the neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux. Take a little break here. Sensory signals from eye or ear travel first to the brain, to the thalamus, and then across a single synapse to the amygdala. A second signal is routed to the neocortex, the thinking brain. This branching allows the amygdala to respond before the neocortex, which molds information through several levels of brain circuits before it fully initiates its more finely tailored response. Dr. Goldman refers to this as the amygdala hijacking the brain. Emotions have the power to overwhelm rationality. The brain has two memory systems, one for ordinary facts and one for emotionally charged ones. If you are hypersensitive to threats, perhaps because of traumatic experiences as a child, before you learn to discriminate properly, you may perceive ordinary facts as threatening your life or sense of yourself. The emotional distance you need to assess situations to distinguish between the dangerous and the benign is just not there. You jump to conclusions, as they say. This overreaction can lead to a lot of stress in family relationships or relationships with friends and associates. Emotional reactivity does not need to be a permanent behavior pattern, but you need to recognize the pattern to change your behaviors. It will not happen by itself. The amygdala can react in a delirium of rage or fear before the cortex knows what's going on, Dr. Goldman says, because such raw emotion is triggered independent of and prior to thought. Fortunately for most of us, there's a damper switch called the prefrontal lobe. It's where planning and organizing actions, including emotional actions, towards a goal takes place. This is the process of discernment. It allows us to act on information about our emotions rather than acting on impulse. The better we learn to do this, the greater our emotional intelligence. The kind of calm, reasoned thinking that we use in non-threatening, non-emotional situations, the kind of thinking that IQ tests are designed to measure, is not possible in emotionally charged situations. Learning to use those rational skills during emotionally significant times is learning emotional intelligence. The important thing here is that we can learn these skills if we invest energy in doing so. It doesn't mean giving up defensiveness. It means becoming aware of it and choosing a different, more calculated response. To do this, you have to learn to slow down. Citing the work of Yale psychologist Peter Salovey, these are the 5 domains that Dr. Goldman identifies. The first one is knowing one's emotions. Number 2 is managing emotions. 3 is motivating oneself. 4 is recognizing emotions in others. And 5 is handling relationships. Knowing your emotions, the first domain, means having self-awareness, recognizing a feeling as it happens. You might think that we all know our emotions as they occur. Not true. The amygdala can override our ability to think clearly. If we don't recognize our emotions, they dictate our actions. Not good. Not good in forming and maintaining relationships. Not good even for our own health. The second domain here is managing emotions. Simply stated, this is handling emotions so that they are appropriate to the situation. If you can't handle them as you would a concrete object, you will get worn out from battling them. You'll be constantly battling depression or anger or irritability. There are ways to handle your emotions. The third domain is motivating yourself. You organize your emotions in service to a goal. You delay gratification. You stifle impulsiveness. The fourth domain is recognizing emotions in others. It's amazing how difficult that is when you are completely caught up in your own emotions, your own disorganized emotions. You can't have empathy towards someone else if you can't escape your own emotional flux long enough to pay attention to the signs that others give you of their emotional state. The fifth domain then is handling relationships. In some way, this means handling the emotions of others, either by non-reactivity or empathy. Handling a relationship means helping someone else manage their emotions by not contributing to their emotional reactivity. But it doesn't mean that you take responsibility for other person's emotions. Emotional intelligence can't be measured the way we measure intellectual competence with a test or a series of tests. Emotional intelligence is measured in a more subjective way through your success in establishing and maintaining healthy relationships with others. Dr. Goldman uses the term self-awareness in this way: the sense of an ongoing attention to one's internal states. In this self-reflexive awareness, the mind observes and investigates experience itself, including the emotions. It's a kind of neutral state, a state resembling, if not identical to, what the Buddhists call non-attachment. You can be self-reflective when you sit in meditation. You can also be self-reflective when you feel surges of emotions. It's just more difficult and takes more skill, and those skills are developed through practice. The practice of meditation, observing the movement of the mind, can be applied when the emotions are stirred. In the quiet state, we call this meditation. In the active state, we call it mindfulness. We are observing the flow of your emotions with equanimity, as we might observe the waves in the ocean. We become aware of our mood and our thoughts about our mood. The neocortical circuits are actively monitoring the emotions. Self-awareness is a non-reactive, non-judgmental attention to inner states. The psychologist John Mayer says that people tend to fall into one of three styles for attending to and dealing with their emotions. The first style is self-awareness. You are aware of your moods as you have them. You don't focus on a bad mood when it occurs. You don't obsess about it. Your mindfulness helps you manage it. The second style is being engulfed. You feel swamped by your emotions. You are mercurial. You don't seem to be aware that your emotions are not identical to yourself. You feel that you have no control over your emotions. You feel overwhelmed and out of control. And then the third style is accepting. You identify your emotions. You are clear about what they are, but you don't attempt to change anything. People who are chronically depressed choose this style, if only by default. Is there ever a time you are not thinking? If you are awake, you are thinking almost always, even if the thoughts are in the background, what Dr. Goldman calls a murmur of background thoughts. Is there ever a time you're not experiencing a feeling? This must be very rare. You are always in some kind of a mood. Your emotional life is ongoing as long as your life itself is ongoing. The important question is, are you aware of that feeling? Emotions are a reality. Pretending that they don't exist or that they are not important is a distortion of reality. Once you commit yourself to living in a distorted reality, your ability to function well with other people also becomes distorted. Distorted is as distorted does. Ignoring your emotions can be as devastating as ignoring the signs of bodily distress that indicate that you should be seeking medical treatment. It is only natural that we react emotionally when we believe that our life or our health is at risk. But typically no allowance is made for that reality in the medical profession, though things thankfully have been improving over the last couple of decades. Goldman says this inattention to emotional reality of illness neglects a growing body of evidence showing that people's emotional states can play a sometimes significant role in their vulnerability to disease and in the course of their recovery. Modern medical care too often lacks emotional intelligence. Goldman suggests that an emotional intervention should be a standard part of medical care for the range of serious disease. He makes a distinction between disease, the medical disorder, and illness, the patient's experience of the disease. The medical professional typically focuses only on the so-called objective description of the disease. True therapeutic treatment also takes into account the patient's experience of the disease, because the fundamental relationship between doctor and patient is a human one of healing, not just diagnosis and medical treatment. Our emotions can poison us. They can literally be toxic to our health. Research indicates that people who experience chronic anxiety, long periods of sadness and pessimism, unremitting tension or incessant hostility, relentless cynicism or suspiciousness were found to have double the risk of disease, including asthma, arthritis, headaches, peptic ulcers, and heart disease. This order of magnitude makes distressing emotions as toxic a risk factor as, say, smoking or high cholesterol are for heart disease. In other words, a major threat to health. If you are aware of your emotions as they develop and you learn to regulate those emotions, you can significantly alter your health for the better. Clinical data have proven the deleterious effects of chronic negative emotions on the heart and immune function, the critical term here being chronic. The last thing I'm going to talk about here is just he talks about the big three negative emotions are anger, anxiety, and depression. Anger seems to be the one emotion that does the most harm to the heart. In a study at the Stanford Medical School, while patients recounted incidents that made them mad, the pumping efficiency of their hearts dropped by 5 percentage points. Some of the patients showed a drop in pumping efficiency of 7% or greater, a range that cardiologists regard as a sign of myocardial ischemia, a dangerous drop in blood flow to the heart itself. Unmonitored anger can be suicidal. A program in anger control training developed at Stanford for patients who had suffered heart attacks resulted in a second heart attack rate of 44% lower for those who had not tried to change their hostility. The next is anxiety. Anxiety can be defined as the stress evoked by life's pressures. There's much scientific evidence connecting it to the onset of sickness and course of recovery. A study at Yale documented this broad spectrum of effects, compromising immune function to the point that it can speed the metastasis of cancer, increasing vulnerability to viral infections, exacerbating plaque formation leading to epithelial sclerosis, and blood clotting leading to myocardial infarction, accelerating the onset of type 1 diabetes in the course of type 2 diabetes, and worsening or triggering an asthma attack. The emotions are out of balance. If the emotions are out of balance, the body feels compromised, protective functions break down. The nervous system is subject to wear and tear as a result of stressful experiences. Finally, depression. Depression sufferers have a sharply higher risk of dying within the first 6 months of a heart attack. In a study of patients in a Montreal hospital who were discharged after being treated for a first heart attack, among the 1 in 8 patients who were seriously depressed, the death rate was 5 times higher than for others with comparable disease, an effect as great as that of a major risk for cardiac death, such as left ventricular function or a previous history of heart attacks. Chronic emotional distress is toxic. Positive emotional states can improve your health. There's no magic pill to transform a negative emotion, but there are strategies that you can use to improve your mental and physical health. You can strive to be healthy emotionally by practicing mindfulness in all the moments of your days. Mindfulness is simply being attuned to what is going on inside you as well as around you. It is not suppressing thoughts or emotions that you have aversions to. It's not clinging to pleasurable states. It is adopting an attitude of curious observation, a kind of benign non-attachment, a relinquishing of the desire to control so much, especially the things that are out of your control. Reverend Connolly goes on to say, "Why am I talking to you about this? Because I care about you, each of you, and I want you to enjoy the peace that comes from emotional stability. But I also care about all of us as a spiritual community, and I want us to be healthy and to thrive. I want ours to be the kind of spiritual community that nourishes your spirit because you bring to us your own nourishing spirit." So in conclusion, this church is your church, and you make it your church by your presence and your willingness to be present as your emotions unfold. I'll close with a quote from Emotional Intelligence. "Whenever people come together to collaborate, there is a very real sense in which they have a group IQ, a sum total of all the talents and skills of those involved. The single most important element in group intelligence, it turns out, is not the average IQ in the academic sense, but rather in terms of emotional intelligence. The key to a high group IQ is social harmony." So I guess now we got another hymn, hymn number 311, "Let It Be a Dance." It's a great one.
work.